Joining us to discuss that is Hugh Odom. He's the founder and president of Vertical Consultants, which is a cell tower consulting firm. Mr. Odom, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What is it about 5G that's such a concern for air travel? Can you explain that for us in layman's terms?
Sure. The basic thing that we're experiencing between the FAA and the aviation industry and the AT&T and Verizon is that the aviation industry is saying the 5G on C-band, what's called C-band, is kind of the bandwidth, is going to possibly, and I want to emphasize the word possibly, cause interference with the altimeters. And the altimeter in the plane basically determines the altitude or shows the altitude. And this is important when landing in foggy or conditions or weather conditions that are substandard. What they're saying, what the FAA is saying, is somehow 5G is interfering with that piece of equipment. And they want to further study this, it being the aviation industry, until they determine if there can be a solution to this. Now, the bigger issue for the wireless industry is this has been an ongoing rollout that's been pushed back. As you mentioned, we now have it back to January 19th, and the wireless industry is pushing back and saying, look, 5G is up and running in 40 other countries, and there's no interference issue with the altimeters. And the FAA and the aviation industry really hasn't provided any kind of, information of what the actual issue will be, and secondly, how the wireless industry can solve that issue.
I was just going to ask you about that in terms of the run-up to this. Like these buffer zones for 6 months, I guess that makes sense so that they can figure this out. But leading up to this, have the two sides just not been talking? Have they not been able to find a solution? I mean, I presume that other forms of wireless systems, 4G, 3G, LTE, have not presented exactly the same problem, or maybe they'd be further ahead on dealing with it by now.
Well, that's a great question. The aviation industry has known about the wireless rollout of 5G for almost 2 years now. So here we are in the 11th hour. We pushed that back even further with this issue of 5G. And they've tried to work it out over the last few months, but they really, again, can't come to any kind of, any kind of solution with regards to what the actual problem is, identifying the problem. The difference between 5G and 4G and its predecessors, as I've mentioned before, the 5G is going to run in AT&T and Verizon, for AT&T Verizon more particularly, in the C-band width. And C-band width is where these altimeters run, and a lot of other devices. So they're going in, 5G is going in an area where it's not otherwise used 4G. So what they're trying to do is say, look, there could possibly be an issue. How do we solve this? Like you mentioned, they're going to shut down service within a certain radius of these 50 airports. But you have hundreds of airports around the country where this is not going to happen. And the FAA and the aviation industry is saying, we need to further study this to determine what the actual issue may be.
Is this something that maybe the wireless industry could have seen coming and prevented? I mean, the rollout of these technologies, I understand why AT&T and Verizon want these to happen lickety-split. There's a lot of money to be made in the transition to 5G, but this seems like a foreseeable problem that maybe the industry could have noticed, worked around, talked to the FAA and airlines on beforehand, and everyone come to a solution before the FAA and the Department of Transportation have to say, please stop.
Well, the issue there, so like you mentioned, for AT&T and Verizon, they spent over $80 billion to access this C-band frequency I just mentioned. And also, they're lagging behind T-Mobile. T-Mobile's ahead of the race with 5G, and they need access. So they have a lot on the line to get this up and running as fast as possible. The issue is, as I mentioned before, trying to come back to the FAA and the aviation industry and say, look, you've known about this, we've known about this, but we need to have a way to calibrate against these altimeters. And the aviation industry is lagging behind with regard to the age of their inventory and such, and there's not a standard these altimeters have. There's different manufacturers and different filters, so that's where the issue comes into play. It's both sides fault a little bit, but the aviation industry, I think, has a little more culpability here because they've had the time to come to the wireless industry and say, here's the issue, here's how we need to calibrate this, here's how we need to address this. And again, now we're both sides. We have issues that this could possibly delay flights, cancel flights, if this is
Yeah.
an ongoing issue and we have the wireless industry also in trouble.
These are two industries that clearly have a lot at stake financially. Before I got to let you go, there was a survey that Deloitte did last year that found that the average U.S. household has 25 connected digital devices, up from 11 connected digital devices back in 2019. There seems to be a lot at stake for this 5G rollout, just in terms of making sure that we can keep up with ourselves, with our increasingly connected lifestyles.
Definitely. 5G provides a lot of solutions. One is you're able to provide a lot of access for a lot more devices. As you mentioned, we're adding more devices as we grow as a society, a digital society, I should say. The other thing here is we need to rely upon 5G for healthcare, for telemedicine, for educational services, and for work services. More and more people are working remotely, and 5G provides access not only to the typical worker, but it's really important for rural areas, low-income areas, to have access to wireless capabilities to allow them the same abilities that someone living in a higher income area or an urban area would have.
Hugh Odom of Vertical Consultants. Mr. Odom, I appreciate you making time. Thank you very much.